How many of you are familiar with the structure of the syllabus? What is the structure of IGC syllabus? How many units we have and how many elements we have in each unit? Yes, please be open. Yeah.
First unit of 4 units.
In the first yes, unit 1, IGC1 or as of now we call it as IG1. IG1 has 4 elements. Yes, right.
IG2 7.
IG2 has
7
7 elements. Now in IG1, basically it's all about your health and safety management. In the first unit, IG1, it is all about the health and safety management. In IG2, it's all about the workplace hazards and precautions. Right? So the assessment that you're going to face will be for your IG1. And IG2, you have to do a practical application and submit it as a project. Right, so that's how the structure of the examination is. Now in IG1, we have 4 elements. Or yes, 4 elements. The first element is why we should manage workplace health and safety. Why do we need to manage health and safety? Right. And I will also be discussing more in depth about it, like what are the topics that covered in this element. The second element that we have is how health and safety management systems work. What is a management system? How it works, and how do they look like? This is the second element. And the third element, it's all about managing the risks. Where we're going to talk about risk assessments, we're going to talk about safe systems of work, we'll be talking about the permit to work systems. Right? But the core, see, I mean, like for health and safety management, the core is your risk management. Because most of the, even the ISO standards, like whether it is 9001 or 14001 or 45001, all these are risk-based management systems. Right? So now if you don't maintain quality of your products, what happens? You get into losses. You get into bankruptcy, or nobody is going to purchase your products. So there is a risk. So most of the management system has been developed on the risk basis. Okay. Next, the last unit or element we have in the first element, that is IGC1, is about the measuring and reviewing the health and safety performance. Okay. So how are we going to measure the health and safety, and how are we going to review? Right. So these are the 4 elements that we have. Now getting into the IG2, we have various different elements. How many elements do we have in IG2? 7 elements. What are they? Physical and psychological health, musculoskeletal health, next, chemical and biological, general workplace issues. Then you have the fire, electricity, and work equipments. So altogether we have 7 elements. I'm not putting in this in the same order, but these are the 7 elements that we have. Right. Now, let us get into the first element of the IG1. Okay. Now, I don't want blank faces. I just want an interaction. Okay. And also ensure if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me. I don't want you to carry the questions outside this room. Right. So please feel free. Let us work out here as a team. And the objective is to gain certain knowledge and skills, and whatever the knowledge and skill that we already have, just brush up. Right. So that's the main objective, core objective. Right. Now in the first element, we have 3 parts. The first one is, do you have the material with you? Not a problem. The first is models and money. Models and money. The second is regulating health and safety. And the third will be, who does what in the organization. So these are the 3 important topics or learning objectives that we have in the first element of IG1. First is model and money. And similarly, in the element 2, like what is the topic? What is the element 2? How health and safety management system works and what they look like. How do they look like? Right. In this particular element, we're going to discuss about what are the benefits of having a management system and what a good health and safety management system looks like. Or in other words, what is the structure of it? Okay. That in depth we are going to discuss. And the third element is a lengthy element where we'll be talking about managing risks, understanding the people and the process, and wherein we have a good number of topics that we'll be covering about. We'll be talking about health and safety culture. We'll also see how to improve the health and safety culture of the organization. And we'll also be looking into some of the human factors that are going to influence whether positively or negatively on the health and safety culture. Then we'll be talking about how to assess the risk. Assess is nothing but examination. In other words, we say risk assessment is basically the examination of the risk. Right. So we'll be discussing on the risk assessment. Then we'll also be discussing on the management of change. In short, it's called as MOC. Management of change. Whenever there's a change, how are you going to manage the change? So, in case you don't happen to manage the change, what happens? The change may not be effective. Your intention is positive, however, the outcomes of the results may not be positive as intended. So therefore, we have to manage the change. That is also one of the topics that we'll be covering in the third element. Then we'll also have another important topic, which is safe systems of work. Development of safe systems of work. We're going to see what basically a safe system of work is and what factors have to be considered when you're developing a safe system of work. Then we'll also be looking into the different techniques of developing a safe system of work, right? And of course, the general aspects like involvement, how are we going to involve and what is the reason why we have to involve the workers when developing a safe system of work. Then comes your permit to work system. Basically, permit to work system is a part of your safe system of work, right? Or to put it in the management terminology, we call it as management arrangements. Management arrangements. And basically, the management arrangements, in other words, they are also called as risk control systems, RCS. The other word for RCS is management arrangements. Now, one of the risk control system is your risk assessment. The second one is your safe system of work. A part of the safe system of work is your permit to work system. Right? So we'll also be looking into what a permit to work system is and what are the operational stages of permit to work. How can we ensure the effectiveness of the permit to work system, or what activities the permit to work system applies. So these are the things that we'll also be discussing in the third element. Finally, we also have the emergency. Okay, what are the emergency procedures? Or in other words, exigencies, because any organization will have certain emergencies. So we have to be prepared for those emergencies, and we should also be preparing the emergency procedure. So we're going to see how are we going to develop an emergency procedure, what are the reasons why we have to develop, and we'll also look into the other aspects of emergencies. What are the possible emergencies that may happen in the organization? So all these are the topics that will be covered in your third element. The last element is your health and safety monitoring and measuring. In other words, evaluation, measurement of health and safety performance. So there are various different techniques of measuring the health and safety performance. One, I think we are very close. Can we shift? Yeah, please write it here. Okay. What are the different ways in which we can measure the health and safety performance? Basically, we have two different types of monitoring. One is called as active monitoring, the other one is reactive monitoring. Certain measurement we do before something happens, and certain we do after something happens. Like for example, in measurement of your accidents or near misses or your ill healths, all these are reactive. When do you measure? How many number of sickness absenteeism we have in the organization? After the sickness absenteeism. But whereas when you carry out a safety inspection, or when you carry out something like a safety survey, those are active. So we are going to discuss on various different monitoring techniques. Then we'll also be discussing on the investigation, accident investigation. What are the different types of accidents that can happen, and why do we need to investigate? Why is it important to investigate an accident or an incident? And then we'll also look into what is the procedure of investigating these accidents. Right? Next comes your health and safety audit. Audits. We're going to see now what a health and safety audit is, what are the stages of health and safety audit, how do we need to prepare for a health and safety audit, right? So, in other words, what are the stages of audits and what will be the outcomes of the audits. Finally, we'll also be looking into the review of health and safety performance. Why is it important to review? Who is going to review the health and safety performance? And when the review has to happen? So, these are all some of the aspects that we'll be discussing in our program. So now I'm going to spread this for 2 days. So today we'll be talking about some of the very basic things with respect to the first element, and then we'll also be continuing with the second element where we'll be talking about health and safety culture and the various aspects of health and safety culture. Alright? So and tomorrow we'll be continuing with some part of element 3 and element 4. In other words, I put it this way: element 1 and 2 will be covering today. Element 3 and 4 will be covering tomorrow. And maybe we'll spend about a couple of hours on the examination. Like what are the examination? What is the examination pattern, and how you can expect the exam? Basically, it's all about scenarios. So you'll be given with a scenario, and you have to apply the knowledge and skills that you have gained in that workplace scenario. So we'll be discussing on various different possibilities, like how the question can be. So the objective is you have to be familiar. Like subjectively you might be thorough. You know what a risk assessment is. You know what a safe system of work is, or you know what an audit is. But in the real-time scenario, how are you going to apply this knowledge and skills is what is important. So in order to clear the exam, you should be familiar. And also we also have some technical aspects, like how to log in into the NEBOSH open book examination portal, and what applications are permissible or supported, and how are you going to log in. So basically I have some screenshots which have been given by NEBOSH that I'll be also showing it to you. So we'll have a clear picture. So because if you're familiar with the system beforehand, of course you will get the login IDs 3 days prior to the exam. Right. So therefore you have sufficient time to make yourself familiar with the system, but still, since we already have the guidance, I'll be sharing that with you, and that will be done tomorrow. Now, the first element. What is the first element? Why do we need to manage health and safety? Why should we manage health and safety? Now, I'm not going to get into the definitions and the basic stuff, because I don't have so much of time. So we'll be, I'm expecting, this is what my presumption is. I'm expecting that you already have gone through this subject. So this is what my presumption is, and this is what the actual exercise is. All right. So on that line, I will try to brush up these concepts. Where required, I will also be spending some additional time so that you also get familiar with the topics. Now, why do we need to have health and safety in the organization? What are the reasons why health and safety has to be managed?
It's a moral reason.
Moral reason, okay.
Legal reason.
Okay.
Financial.
Basically, these are, as long as we are in the field of health and safety, these are the 3 reasons why we manage health and safety. We have certain moral obligations, we have some legal obligations, and we also have some financial obligations. Now let's first look into what are the moral obligations. Now even in the examination perspective, you will be given with a scenario and you will be asked to give a justification based on the moral obligations. How do you do it? What is moral obligation? Why do we need to manage health and safety on a moral basis?
Protecting ourselves.
Protecting
ourselves first.
Okay.
And
Protecting yourself.
protecting society also.
Be a little louder.
Humanity.
Who said that?
Humanity.
One of the core reasons is humanitarian objective. We know what the pain and suffering is. Now, say for example, like, you are hurt because of something that I've done, intentionally or unintentionally. But here what I mean is unintentional. It was not my intention, but you got hurt. So immediately we respond to that. We can put ourselves in his position, and generally we do that. Now, normally when you're just passing by on the road and someone happens to be injured, and what do? Maybe you are driving on a vehicle, but you make it a point to just park your vehicle aside, come and attend to the person, just find out what has happened. Do you know the person? Are you related to him? No. The reason is humanitarian objective, because we know what pain and suffering is. And another important reason, moral obligation, is because you see, internationally there are a good number of accidents and incidents that are happening. Any idea how many accidents and incidents are happening each year? Close to about 210 million occupational accidents are happening each year. 210 million occupational accidents and 160 million occupational diseases that are being recorded each year. And this data is given by ILO, of course, a few years back. But it is closer to that. There's so much of a variation. 210 million occupational accidents and 160 million occupational diseases that are being recorded each year. And what we're talking about is workplace. We're not talking about the general diseases. We're not talking about the general injuries. We're talking about the workplace accidents and incidents. Do you think it is acceptable? Do you think these numbers are acceptable? No. Another important thing is, when you look into these, or when you investigate these accidents and incidents, we get to a conclusion that 70% of these accidents and incidents could have been prevented. 70%. So for example, like in your organization, you have about 10 accidents, or you had some 10 fatal accidents in a year. So possibly when you investigate, you get to know that almost like 7 accidents could have been prevented. Alright? So do you think it is morally acceptable?
No, sir.
No. So that's another reason why we have to manage health and safety. Right? So these are some of the arguments which basically are referred to as model arguments. And even NEBOSH, in the guidelines and the sample question paper, the same has been mentioned. Like, there is a scenario which I'm going to share tomorrow. Okay? He's going to ask you, like, you are the health and safety advisor or the manager of the organization, and you are chairing a meeting, a health and safety meeting. So how are you going to justify based on the moral arguments? So what are the moral arguments that you're going to have? Number one, you have to ensure that on a humanitarian objective, on the humanitarian basis, we cannot allow another person to be injured. We cannot allow another person to die. Now, for example, a worker is coming to the organization and the employer is paying a salary. Some amount of salary has been decided, mutually decided. But it doesn't mean like the person is coming at the cost of his lives and limbs. It doesn't mean like because you're paying 20,000 salary. You read something?
Yes.
If you need a pen, I think. See a problem. Okay, good. Okay. As I was saying, like, you are paying an employee with certain salary. It doesn't mean like he comes to the organization with 2 hands and 2 legs and goes back with 1 hand and 1 leg. No, it is not acceptable. Morally, it is not acceptable. So what it means is when somebody is employed, it is the moral obligation of the employer to provide with certain obligations. To provide with certain obligations or fulfillment of certain responsibilities. In short, we call it as duty of care. You heard about duty of care? Duty of care is nothing but the moral obligation of the employer. So what comes under the moral duty of care? I'm only talking about the model obligations. What comes under the model duty of care?
Working safely?
No.
No.
Imagine this way, like you are an employer, okay, and we are all your employees. What are your obligations? Model obligations.
Good relationship.
Okay.
No one should be exposed to harm or injury.
Right.
And
Providing personal protective kits
Right.
and the awareness of the hazards in the workplace.
That means providing with information, right? Let me tell you.
Proper observation regarding the workplace.
Observation,
And
I put it as supervision.
Guiding
Right?
the
That's also one of the obligations.
Even training.
Providing with adequate training. Yes. Now basically see, under the model obligations, the very most important is providing with a safe workplace.
Acha.
Providing with a safe workplace. The workplace has to be
Safe.
suitable for the job being carried out. Another important thing is to provide with safe work equipments. To provide with safe systems of work, procedures. To provide with information, training, instruction and supervision. To provide with adequate personal protective equipments and also welfare facilities free of charge. Now, most of the times, people come out with a doubt here. When I'm talking about the safe system of work, safe systems of work, or safe workplace, safe work equipments, basically, we're talking about some legal obligations as well. They come under the responsibilities of the employer, right? So always there is a debate, not a debate, kind of a doubt that most of the people get. Let me clarify that. First thing, how do we get loss? How do we get loss? What are loss? Certain guidelines, do's and don'ts, right? A set of guidelines that we need to follow. Who makes the laws?
Mistakes made laws.
Legal laws.
Breaching laws.
No. Who makes the laws? Government. Who makes the government?
Authority bodies like
Who makes the government?
people.
People. So who is making the law?
People.
People are making the law. For whom the law is being made?
People.
For the people. So basically, laws are a set of guidelines made by the people for the people. Now, how do we decide what should be made as a law? The decision will be taken on our moral obligations. Got it? So always the legal obligations are the outcome of your moral obligations. So don't get confused there. Because when I talk about duty of care, basically duty of care comes under your moral obligation. But there are certain legal obligations as well, which are mandatory. Every employer will have to fulfill those legal obligations, failing which there might be possible actions taken by the government. Right? So don't get confused there. So legal obligations are the outcome of your social obligations, moral obligations. So this is all about moral. Now when we talk about legal, what are the legal obligations?
Compliance with rules.
Right. So as I told you, basically law is what? A rule of human conduct. A rule of human conduct. How we behave. Okay. So a rule of human conduct is what is called as a law. In simple terminology, we can also call it as guidelines. Set of do's and don'ts. You're failing to do that, you'll be prosecuted, or there will be some kind of a legal action against you. Right? Now, for example, if you have a speed limit on the road, that is law. That's been put by the enforcement agency, stating that 60 kilometers per hour is the maximum speed limit, failing which there will be a charge, there will be a prosecution, there will be a fine, there will be a penalty, or in some cases they may also cancel your license, or in some cases they may seize your vehicle. The authority has the the power to do that. We'll be discussing those powers in short time. Right? Now again, when we talk about the law, there are two different types of laws. One is the criminal law. The second one is
Civil law.
civil law. Civil law basically is about what? Civil law?
Is associated with compensation.
Yeah, associated with compensation, right? That is, in other words, I can say like the outcome of the civil law is compensation, and the outcome of the criminal law is prosecution. But when do we, say for example, when do we go to a civil court?
A person's relatives or family can directly go to civil court.
Okay, but when?
So
When
the
there is a murder,
Any
or when there is some, many other.
assault on the person.
Any complaint filed against him by
So basically, civil law relates to disputes. Relates to disputes between two parties, two or more parties. For example, like I say, oh, this is my property, and you say this is your property. No, I say this is correct, and you say it is wrong. There's a dispute. There's difference between two or more parties. Who is going to decide who is correct? Civil law. But whereas when it comes to the criminal law, it is when there is a breach of a law. When there's a breach of law, if I put it across, like what a civil law is and what a criminal law is. Civil law is basically relating to your disputes. And who initiates a civil case? Anyone who is affected. Anyone who is affected can initiate a civil case. But can you initiate a criminal case? The enforcement agency can do that. Similarly, there is also a time frame. When it comes to civil law, the case has to be initiated, and there is a time frame, basically 2 years from the discovery of harm. The civil law can be initiated within 2 years from the discovery of harm, not from the time when you. I'll give you an example. For example, a person was working in an organization, maybe between 2005 to 2007. This was the tenure. Later on, he moved to another company and another company. Possibly now he's working with the third or fourth company. In 2020, he's been diagnosed with mesothelioma, lung cancer, generally caused by the exposure to asbestos. We call it as asbestosis, and then we also have the mesothelioma. Now, when did he discover this? In 2020. But when was he exposed to asbestos? In 2006, when he was involved in a particular project. Okay. Now, it's almost been 14 years. Normally, there are some effects which are called as chronic effects, and some are acute effects. Acute effects, you'll be able to see the effects almost immediately. But chronic effects will take a long time. Generally, chronic effects are due to the long-term exposure to the hazard. Okay, and where the effect is generally irreversible. Now, once a person is suffering with lung cancer, can you reverse the cancer? No, you can't do it. I'll give you another example. Say, for example, like you have a blast. There's an explosion. There's an explosion. Now, you've been exposed to high levels of noise for a very short duration of time. For a very short duration of time. Possibly certain milliseconds. But after that, after the exposure, you will feel like there is some ringing sound in the ear. That's what is also referred to as tinnitus. how long is it going to last? So something has happened because of the exposure to the noise. But the tinnitus will generally last for a maximum of 2 days. Maximum is 2 days. Got it? After that, your hearing is normal. So it is a reversible process. That's what is referred to as an acute event. But say the same noise, which was the hazard, you've been exposed continuously for a prolonged duration, or maybe you're working on a noisy machinery and you've been continuously being exposed to the high levels of noise. What happens? Gradually, there will be something what is called as NIHL, noise-induced hearing loss. Now, after that, the person is deaf. He's not able to hear properly. The hearing is lost. Can you reverse it back? That's a chronic effect. So certain effects might be chronic effects, which generally happen or show up after a long duration of time. Now, when did the person discover that he's suffering with lung cancer? In 2020, 14 years after the exposure. Because normally asbestos takes about 2 to 20 years to cause harm. It also depends on the dosage, the amount of asbestos that is being inhaled. Alright? Also depends on the response of the individual. So basically, any chemical exposure will be based on 3 factors. One is toxicity, how toxic the substances, hazardous substances, and for how long it has been exposed, or in other words, what is the amount to which it has been exposed, dose. The third one is the response of the individual. So these are the 3 factors that generally decide. So unfortunately, in 2020, so now what is he going to do? Can he sue the employer? Yes, of course. Yes. That's the reason why I said in civil cases, the person gets 2 years of time from the discovery of harm. You got it? Note this statement. I think that's what I told you, right? 2 years from the discovery of harm. So when the harm was discovered? In 2020. So he can file the case till 2022. But when it comes to a criminal case, criminal cases are basically when there is a breach of law. When there is a breach of law, it leads to a criminal case. And who is going to initiate the criminal case? Enforcement agencies, not you and me. And how much time do they get? 6 months. Within 6 months, they have to file the case, or they have to submit what we generally call it as a charge sheet, okay, in the court. And what will be the outcome of a criminal case? Punishment. Either in the form of fines, in the form of prosecutions, okay, or in the form of
Imprisonment.
imprisonment. Yes. Right, so these are the 2 different types of laws that we have. One is the criminal law, the other one is the civil law. Right? So we just need to have the understanding about how these 2 different laws work. All right, next. As I was talking about the duty of care. So what is the duty of care? Is it a legal obligation or a moral obligation? Moral obligation. Moral obligation. So whenever there is a breach of this moral obligation, then you can take the employer to the court under which law? Civil law. Because there's a dispute. So what I say, I'm your employee. Now I have been injured in the organization, and it was your responsibility to provide me with certain care. You're supposed to fulfill the duty of care. Now I take you to the court, and what I have to prove in the court are 3 things. One, the employer generally got what is called as defendant. Now I'm the claimant. You are the defendant in the civil case. Now the claimant has to first prove that the defendant owes a duty of care. You owe a duty of care. You are supposed to provide me with safe workplace, or you are supposed to provide me with certain information. And second, fulfillment is to prove that the duty of care was breached. He did not fulfill the duty of care. The third is the injury or the damage, generally physically, has happened because of the breach. Imagine, we are working at height, and I'm an employee. You asked me to work at height, and you were supposed to provide me with the personal protective equipment. Or you were supposed to provide me with a safe workplace, a safe working platform with edge protection. You did not provide. And because you did not provide the edge protection, I fell down and I've been injured. I have a fracture. What I have to do is I can take you to the court, and first I'm going to say that you owe a duty of care because I'm your employee. I'm on your rolls. You are paying a salary to me, and you owe a duty of care. Second, the duty of care was breached. You did not fulfill the duty of care. And since you did not fulfill the duty of care, I have been injured. So these are the three conditions that have to be met. And if these three conditions are met, it comes under the fault liability. The employer is at fault, and therefore the employer will have to compensate the employer. Second scenario is like where we call it as vicarious liability. That's also another type of liability is your contributory negligence.
Directly, employer is responsible for that.
Ultimately, the employer will be responsible. That's why we use the word ultimately responsible and accountable. Now, another reason why we have to maintain good standards of health and safety is your financial. Because any accident, or in other words, every accident comes with a cost. Accidents don't come cheap. They come with some cost. Right. Now, these costs can basically be divided as direct costs or indirect costs. Direct costs are those costs that are caused directly because of the accident, and certain costs will come as a consequence of your accident. Now, for example, there's an explosion in the plant in the organization, and due to this explosion, there was a damage to the property. Certain people were injured who had to be hospitalized, and certain people had to be provided with first aid. Certain people, because of the injury, will not be able to come to the organization. Still, you have to pay the salaries to them, sick days. Alright? And you also have to carry out accident investigations. Now, that is not a direct cost. Indirect cost. The cost associated with the investigation. Because that is coming as a consequence. It's following the accident. But say, for example, there is a loss of reputation in the market. Okay? So, accident did not directly cause the loss of reputation. Accident did not directly, print your organization's name in the headlines, but it came as a consequence. Your insurance premiums will rise, all right? Or possibly the employees will not be able to come back to the organization. For example, certain fatalities. You have to have some supporting staff, or you need to have some replacement staff, or you need to have some new staff. So where you're going to undergo your recruitment charges, where you'll have to train the new employees, and they're not going to give you the same level of production as the previous employees did. So again, there's a loss of production. There is a downtime. All these will come under your indirect costs. So put together, we have direct costs, and we also have certain indirect costs.